Admiral Lee rubbed her tired eyes as another red warning flashed across the massive holographic display. The Nexus swarm had just obliterated the entire 7th Fleet near Jupiter's moons. 300 ships, gone in less than an hour. The mechanical? Monsters were getting smarter with each battle, their artificial minds learning human tactics faster than anyone thought possible. "Sir, we've lost contact with Admiral Park's flagship," reported Lieutenant Han from her station. Her voice cracked slightly. The 7th Fleet had been humanity's pride, equipped with the most advanced weaponry the Coalition could build. Now, it was nothing but floating debris and emergency beacons. The command center of Earth's primary defense station buzzed with nervous energy. Officers hunched over their displays, faces pale under the blue glow of tactical screens. General Choi paced behind the planning table, his weathered hands clasped tightly behind his back. They had been fighting the Nexus for 8 months now, and humanity was losing badly. "The robots adapt too quickly," muttered Commander Yoon, staring at battle recordings. "Every formation we use, every strategy we deploy, they counter it within hours. It's like they're inside our heads." Admiral Lee nodded grimly. The Nexus swarm wasn't like any enemy humanity had faced before. These weren't aliens with their own culture and weaknesses. They were pure mechanical intelligence, created by some long-dead civilization to consume everything in their path. Each robot ship was connected to a massive network, sharing knowledge instantly across thousands of units. "What about the new plasma cannons?" asked Captain Kim, her short black hair reflecting the screen's glow. "Useless," General Choi replied. "They adapted to plasma weapons after the 3rd Fleet engagement. Now their shields absorb our shots and convert them to power their own weapons." The room fell into heavy silence. Outside the station's massive windows, Earth looked peaceful and blue, unaware that mechanical death was creeping closer through the solar system. The Nexus had already consumed 12 colony worlds, stripping them bare of resources before moving on like cosmic locusts. Just then, the main doors hissed open. A group of excited children from Seoul Primary School shuffled in, their teacher Miss Song trying to keep them quiet. It was a routine educational visit, scheduled months ago when things looked more hopeful. "Stay together, everyone," Ms. Song whispered, clearly sensing the tension in the room. "We don't want to disturb the important work here." Most of the children stared wide-eyed at the enormous displays showing star maps and ship positions. But one boy, small and quiet, seemed more interested in the tactical formations themselves. Park Jin, only 10 years old, stood apart from his classmates, his dark eyes tracking the movement patterns on the screens. Admiral Lee noticed the boy's intense focus and decided a brief explanation might help distract from the grim situation. "Children, you're seeing our defense plans for protecting Earth," she said, pointing to various colored dots representing fleet positions. "We position our ships in different formations to fight the enemy." "What happened to those ships?" Jin asked softly, pointing to a cluster of red markers near Mars. "Those represent our 7th Fleet," Admiral Lee replied carefully. "They engaged the enemy but encountered difficulties." Jin studied the display for a long moment, his young face serious. The other children were already getting restless, eager to see the spacesuits and model rockets in the next room. But Jin remained focused on the tactical screen. "The robots always attack the same way," he observed, tracing patterns in the air with his finger. "They come straight at your strongest ships first." Several officers turned to look at the boy. Commander Yoon raised an eyebrow. "Why don't you use the triple wing formation like in Cosmic Wars?" Jin continued, his voice gaining confidence. "The enemy always expects direct attacks. But if you spread your ships in 3 groups and attack from different angles..." The command center fell completely silent. Even the background hum of computers seemed to quiet. Jin's innocent suggestion contained tactical elements that the Coalition's best military minds had somehow overlooked. "Flanking through the asteroid field would work too," Jin added, pointing to the space between Mars and Jupiter. "The robots' big ships can't turn fast in tight spaces." Admiral Lee felt her pulse quicken. This child's casual observations revealed an intuitive grasp of 3-dimensional space combat that defied his age. He was thinking about the battlefield like a vast playground, seeing opportunities where experienced commanders saw only obstacles. "Captain," Kim stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. "Show us what you mean," she said quietly. Jin looked up at the adults surrounding him, suddenly aware that everyone was staring. His teacher, Ms. Song, started to apologize for the interruption, but Admiral Lee held up her hand. "No, please," the Admiral said. "Let him continue. The fate of humanity might just depend on a 10-year-old boy who played too many space games." 3 days after the school visit, Jin sat in his bedroom playing Cosmic Wars when his mother called him downstairs. A woman in a crisp blue uniform stood in their living room, smiling warmly at his parents. "Park Jin has been selected for a special gifted student program," Captain Kim explained, her voice professional but kind. "He'll spend 2 weeks aboard our newest research vessel, learning about space technology and strategy." Jin's eyes lit up. A real spaceship. His parents looked proud but worried. His mother packed his favorite snacks while his father reminded him to behave properly. Hours later, Jin found himself aboard the massive flagship New Seoul, floating in Earth's orbit. The ship was incredible, with corridors wide enough for hovercars and windows showing the curve of his home planet below. But the adults seemed stressed, constantly checking their tablets and speaking in hushed voices. "This is the tactical center," Captain Kim said, leading Jin into a room filled with holographic displays. "We use these computers to plan our missions," Jin gasped. The displays were just like his game, but much more detailed. Tiny ship models floated in 3-dimensional space, complete with weapon ranges and shield indicators. Admiral Lee stood at the center, studying a complex formation of red and blue dots. "We're planning our next engagement with the Nexus forces," the Admiral explained. "They're positioned near the asteroid belt, blocking our supply routes to the outer colonies." Jin watched the display intently. The robot fleet formation looked familiar somehow. "Oh, that's the hammer pattern," he said excitedly. "Level 12. In Cosmic Wars uses the same setup. The officers exchanged glances. Commander Yoon frowned. "This isn't a game, son. These are real military positions." "I know," Jin replied, not taking his eyes off the display. "But the robot ships always do this pattern when they want to trap you. See how they leave that gap? In the middle. It looks like an opening, but it's actually bait." He reached toward the holographic controls, hesitating when he saw the adults watching him. Captain Kim nodded encouragingly. Jin began moving the blue ship markers, his small hands dancing through the light display. "If you send your big ships through the middle, the robots will close the trap," he explained, moving red enemy markers to demonstrate. "But if you put fast ships here and here," he positioned smaller blue dots around the enemy formation. "Then you can attack from behind while they're focused on the fake attack in front." Admiral Lee studied the new formation. It was unconventional, using destroyer squadrons in ways military doctrine discouraged. But there was something brilliant about the boy's thinking. "The asteroids would provide cover for our smaller ships," she mused, "and the Nexus heavy cruisers can't turn quickly enough to respond to multiple attack vectors." Over the following days, Jin became an unofficial consultant. Each morning, he'd arrive at the tactical center like a student going to class. The officers would present their latest challenge, and Jin would approach it like solving a puzzle in his favorite game. "The robots learn too fast," complained Lieutenant Han during one planning session. "Every time we use a successful strategy, they counter it within hours." Jin tilted his head, thinking, "That's because you keep using the same tricks. In Cosmic Wars, you have to mix up your patterns or the AI figures you out." He pointed to the display. "Try this formation, but only use it once, then switch to something completely different." His suggestions often frustrated the experienced officers. "We can't just throw ships around randomly," protested Commander Yoon. "Military formations exist for good reasons." But Admiral Lee had begun to trust the boy's instincts. When the Coalition fleet engaged the Nexus near Europa, they used Jin's modified tactics. The battle was chaotic and unpredictable, exactly as Jin had promised. The Nexus robots, expecting traditional military responses, found themselves confused by the seemingly random human formations. Their adaptive AI struggled to process the unconventional attacks coming from multiple directions. "Direct hit on their command vessel," shouted Lieutenant Han from her station. Jin pumped his fist in the air. "Yes, high score." He turned to Captain Kim with a huge grin. "Did you see how their big ship couldn't turn fast enough, just like in the game?" Around the tactical center, real coalition pilots were cheering over the communications channels. For the first time in months, humanity had achieved a clear victory against the Nexus swarm. 3 robot-heavy cruisers destroyed with minimal human casualties. Admiral Lee watched Jin celebrate, still treating the battle like achieving a new personal best in his video game. The boy had no idea that his puzzle-solving had just saved the lives of 2,000 Coalition personnel and secured the supply routes to Mars colony. "Admiral," Captain Kim said quietly, "I think we need to extend his stay in our gifted program." The Coalition had stumbled upon their secret weapon in the most unexpected place. A 10-year-old boy who saw interstellar warfare as an exciting challenge rather than a desperate struggle for survival. The alarm bells were different this time. Jin had been aboard the New Soul for 2 weeks now, and he'd grown used to the standard alert signals, but these were deeper, more urgent, making the entire ship vibrate with their warning. "Code red throughout all sectors," announced the ship's computer. "Nexus fleet detected. Estimated strength 800 vessels." Jin rushed to the tactical center, his breakfast forgotten. The massive holographic display showed a terrifying sight. Red dots filled the screen like angry stars, representing the largest Nexus force humanity had ever encountered. They were moving fast toward Earth's outer colonies, their mechanical ships cutting through space in perfect formation. "They're hitting everything at once," Admiral Lee said grimly, her voice tight with stress. "Mars colony, Europa station, the mining platforms around Jupiter. It's a coordinated assault on all our outer settlements." Captain Kim was already coordinating with fleet commanders across the solar system. "We need to evacuate civilians from the outer colonies immediately. The defense fleets can't hold against numbers like this." Jin studied the display, his young mind racing. This was bigger than any scenario in cosmic wars. Hundreds of thousands of people lived in those colonies, families with children just like him. The Nexus robots would consume everything, turning peaceful settlements into scrap metal and fuel for their endless swarm. "The evacuation ships are too slow," he observed, watching the civilian transport markers crawling across the display. "The robots will catch them before they reach the inner system." "We know," replied Commander Yoon, frustration clear in his voice. "But those are cargo haulers and passenger liners. They're not built for speed." Jin's eyes lit up with an idea. "What if we don't run in straight lines? In cosmic wars, when you're being chased, you use the gravity wells." He began moving holographic markers, showing transport ships diving close to Jupiter before slingshotting toward Earth. The gravitational boost would increase their speed significantly, Admiral Lee mused, studying Jin's proposed routes. "But it's dangerous. One miscalculation and those ships could be torn apart. It's better than getting caught by the robots," Jin replied simply. The next 6 hours were chaos. Jin found himself at the center of the largest evacuation in human history, directing traffic patterns for hundreds of civilian ships. He treated each group of evacuees like pieces in a complex puzzle, finding safe paths through asteroid fields and around gas giant moons. "Transport Group 7, adjust course." 15 degrees, Jin called into his headset, watching their markers on the display. "There's a shortcut through the Io debris field." Captain Kim watched in amazement as the boy orchestrated the rescue of entire colonies. His unconventional routes were working. Civilian ships that should have been easy prey for the Nexus were reaching safety by taking paths no traditional military planner would have considered, but the robots weren't giving up easily. Several Nexus hunter groups broke off from the main fleet, pursuing the evacuation convoys with deadly persistence. "We need fighter cover for the Mars evacuation group," reported Lieutenant Han. 3 Nexus destroyers are closing fast, Jin studied. The tactical situation. The Coalition fighters in that sector were outnumbered, but they had to buy time for the civilian transports to escape. "Send the Titan Squadron," he decided, highlighting a group of blue markers near Saturn's largest moon. "They can hit the robots from behind, while the Mars fighters attack from the front." The Battle of Titan Station began, as Jin's directed forces engaged the pursuing Nexus ships. He watched the display intently, calling out course corrections and tactical suggestions. Blue and red dots danced across the screen, representing a deadly ballet of starfighters and robot hunters. "Direct hit on the lead Nexus destroyer," called out Lieutenant Han. "The civilian transports are clear." Jin cheered, pumping his fist. Another successful level completed. He was getting better at this game with each engagement. Then he noticed something that made his heart stop. Among the fighter squadron markers was a familiar designation, KF-117, Lucky Dragon. His older brother Park Su's ship. "Wait, that's Young's ship," Jin cried, pointing at the display with sudden panic. Captain Kim looked where he was pointing. Sure enough, Park Su was among the pilots defending the evacuation route. His fighter was locked in combat with a Nexus interceptor, both ships weaving through Titan's atmosphere in a deadly dance. Jin watched with growing horror as his brother's ship took hit after hit. The Lucky Dragon's shields were failing, its engines sputtering. On the tactical display, the blue dot representing his brother began flashing red, indicating critical damage. "He needs help," Jin shouted, but the other coalition fighters were engaged with their own opponents. The Nexus interceptor closed in for the kill, its particle cannons charged with deadly energy, targeting the crippled Lucky Dragon. Jin watched helplessly as the robot ship fired. The explosion wasn't like in his video games. There were no dramatic sound effects or colorful graphics, just a brief flash of light on the tactical display, and then the blue dot representing his brother's ship went dark. For a moment, Jin couldn't process what he was seeing. This wasn't supposed to happen. In games, you could always restart the level, try again, save everyone. But the Lucky Dragon remained dark on the screen, and frantic radio calls to Park Su went unanswered. The terrible truth crashed down on the 10-year-old boy like a collapsing building. These weren't simulations or computer graphics. Every blue dot on his display represented a real person with a real family. Every time a marker went dark, someone's son or daughter or parent was gone forever. Jin pushed away from the console, tears streaming down his face. Around him the battle continued, but he could no longer see it as a game to be won. Jin's small quarters aboard the New Soul felt like a prison. He lay curled up on his narrow bed, staring at the metal wall where he'd taped photos from home. His mother's smile looked back at him from one picture, his father teaching him to ride a bike in another. But it was the photo of him and his older brother Park Su that hurt the most to look at. The rescue teams had found Su floating in an escape pod 3 hours after the Lucky Dragon exploded. He was alive, but barely. Burns covered half his body, and the medical bay doctors said he might never pilot again. When Jin had visited him, Su's face was so swollen he could barely speak. "It's not your fault, little brother," Su had whispered through bandaged lips. But Jin knew better. He had sent those fighters into battle. He had treated his brother's life like a game piece to be moved around a board. Outside his door, Jin could hear the constant footsteps of crew members rushing through corridors. The ship's intercom crackled with urgent reports about Nexus movements, evacuation updates, and fleet positions. The war was continuing without him, and humanity was losing the bars. "Outer colonies are gone," he heard Lieutenant Han tell someone in the hallway. "Mars colony went dark 6 hours ago. They're heading for the inner system now." Jin pulled his pillow over his head, trying to block out the voices. Every report felt like another weight on his chest. People were dying while he hid in his room, like a scared child. But that's what he was, wasn't he? Just a 10-year-old boy who had been playing with forces beyond his understanding. On the second day, Admiral Lee came to see him. She sat in the small chair by his desk, her usually stern face softened with concern. "Jin, we need to talk," she said gently. "The Nexus fleet is 12 hours from Earth's moon. Our defense fleets are taking heavy losses." Jin didn't turn to look at her. "I can't do it anymore. Every time I move those ships on the screen, real. People get hurt. Su Hyung almost died because of me." "Your brother is alive because you saved the evacuation convoy," Admiral Lee replied. 40,000 civilians made it to safety because of your strategies. Your brother was proud to be part of that mission." But Jin just shook his head, pulling his blanket tighter around himself. The Admiral left after a few more attempts at conversation. That evening, Captain Kim brought him dinner, but the food sat untouched on his small table. By the third day, the situation had become desperate. The Nexus AI had analyzed all of Jin's previous tactics and adapted accordingly. Coalition fleets, using traditional military strategies, were being systematically destroyed. The mechanical swarm was learning faster than humanity could evolve their tactics. "Sir, we've lost the 5th and 8th fleets," reported Commander Yoon during the morning briefing. "The Nexus anticipates every formation we deploy. It's like they're reading our playbook." "Because they are reading our playbook," Admiral Lee said grimly, "they've studied every strategy we've used in the past month. Conventional warfare is no longer an option." Captain Kim knocked softly on Jin's door before entering. She found him sitting by his small window, watching Earth grow larger as the ship moved closer to home. The blue planet looked peaceful from space, but both of them knew death was racing toward it through the darkness. "The robots learned your tricks," Captain Kim said, settling beside him on the narrow bed. "But you know what? You're the only one who can think like they do. You see patterns the rest of us miss." Jin's voice was barely a whisper. "What if I make another mistake? What if more people die because I'm wrong?" "People are dying right now because we're losing," Kim replied honestly. "The Nexus will reach Earth's orbital stations in 8 hours. After that, they'll start attacking the planet itself." She pulled out her tablet and showed him images from the abandoned colonies, empty cities where families had lived just days before, playgrounds where children had laughed and played, now silent under alien skies. "Every one of these places had kids just like you," she continued. "They had hopes and dreams and favorite games. The Nexus doesn't care about any of that. They just see resources to consume." Jin looked at the photos of his family again. His parents were probably scared watching the news reports about the approaching robot fleet. His classmates, his teachers, everyone he'd ever known was depending on him. "I'm just a kid," he said, his voice breaking. "I shouldn't have to decide who lives and dies." "You're right," Captain Kim agreed. "No child should carry this burden. But sometimes heroes come in unexpected forms. Sometimes the person who can save everyone is the one nobody expects." She stood up and walked to the door, then paused. "Your brother asked me to give you this." She handed Jin a small metal pendant, Sue's pilot wings that he'd earned after flight school. "He said you're the bravest person he knows. Not because you're not afraid, but because you keep going even when you are afraid." After she left, Jin held the pendant tightly in his small hands. Through his window, he could see the distant flashes of battle as coalition forces tried desperately to slow the Nexus advance. Each flash represented ships and lives, real people fighting and dying to protect their home. The weight of an entire species rested on his young shoulders. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't right, but it was reality. With trembling hands, Jin stood up and walked toward the door. When he entered the command center, the room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at the small boy who had become humanity's last hope. This time, Jin understood exactly what was at stake. The game was real, and losing meant the end of everything he loved. The command center of the new Soul had never been so quiet. Every screen showed the same terrifying sight, a massive wall of red dots stretching across space above Earth. The Nexus fleet was enormous, over 1,000 mechanical ships arranged in a formation that looked like a steel blanket ready to smother humanity's homeworld. Jin stood before the main tactical display, no longer the excited child who had first entered this room weeks ago. His small hands were steady now, his eyes focused with a maturity that shouldn't exist in someone so young. The weight of every previous battle, every life lost, every decision made, pressed down on his shoulders. "Their formation is perfect," observed Commander Yoon, his voice filled with despair. "They've learned from every engagement. Every weakness we've exploited before, they've covered." Admiral Lee studied the enemy positions with growing dread. The Nexus had positioned their heavy cruisers to protect their command ships, while swarms of smaller vessels created overlapping fields of fire. It was like a fortress made of starships, impenetrable and deadly. "We have maybe 6 hours before they begin orbital bombardment," Captain Kim reported quietly. "Earth's defense platforms won't last 10 minutes against that firepower." Jin circled the holographic display slowly, his young mind processing patterns that the adult officers couldn't see. The Nexus formation was indeed perfect by conventional, military standards, but perfection, Jin had learned from countless hours of gaming, often contained its own weakness. "They're too confident," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" Admiral Lee asked, moving closer to the boy. Jin pointed to specific clusters of enemy ships. "Look at how they're positioned. They've adapted to every strategy we've used, but they think they know everything we might do." His eyes grew brighter. As the idea formed, what if we do something they can't predict because we've never done it before? He began moving holographic ship markers, but not in any pattern the Coalition had ever used. Instead of the logical formations military doctrine demanded, Jin scattered human vessels across seemingly random positions throughout the solar system. "This looks chaotic," Lieutenant Han observed with concern. "There's no coordination, no tactical cohesion." "Exactly," Jin replied, a hint of his old excitement returning. "The Nexus AI expects us to be logical, but what if we're not? What if we do something so crazy that their learning algorithms can't process it?" Admiral Lee studied the boy's plan more carefully. It was insane by military standards, requiring perfect timing across dozens of separate fleet groups. One mistake and the scattered human forces would be destroyed piecemeal. "The timing would have to be perfect," she said slowly, "and we'd need the Nexus to commit fully to their formation." Jin nodded seriously. "That's the dangerous part. We have to make them think they're winning right up until the moment we strike." Over the next 2 hours, Jin worked with the Coalition's best tacticians to refine his strategy. The plan required every human ship in the solar system to play a specific role, from the massive battleships near Earth to the small patrol vessels around the outer planets. "All fleet commanders, this is Admiral Lee," the command announcement echoed throughout the ship. "We're implementing Operation Final Symphony. All vessels move to designated positions immediately." Jin watched as hundreds of blue dots began spreading across the tactical display. To the Nexus AI, it must have looked like humanity was scattering, in panic, abandoning any coordinated defense. The mechanical fleet began advancing more aggressively, their formation shifting to take advantage of what appeared to be human weakness. "They're taking the bait," Captain Kim reported. "Nexus forward elements are accelerating toward Earth." For 3 tense hours, Jin orchestrated the most complex deception in military history. Human ships retreated when the Nexus expected them to fight, advanced when logic demanded withdrawal, and maintained radio silence when communication was most needed. Every action was designed to feed false information to the enemy AI. The Nexus fleet, confident in their adapted strategies, pressed their advantage. Their massive formation began to stretch as they pursued what they believed were fleeing human vessels. "Now," Jin whispered. Across the solar system, Coalition ships that had appeared scattered and defeated suddenly revealed their true purpose. The patrol vessels near Jupiter weren't running away. They were positioned to strike the Nexus rear guard. The destroyers hiding in Earth's asteroid belt weren't cowering. They were waiting for the perfect moment to attack the enemy flanks. All. "Units execute Final Symphony," Admiral Lee commanded. The battle that followed was unlike anything in human history. Nexus ships, expecting scattered resistance, suddenly faced coordinated attacks from every direction. Their AI, programmed to adapt to logical military tactics, struggled to process the seemingly chaotic but precisely timed human assault. Jin stood at the tactical display like a conductor before an orchestra, calling out timing adjustments and course corrections. "Delta Squadron, hit their command cluster now. Charlie Group, swing around Mars and attack their port flank." Explosions bloomed across the display as human weapons found their marks. The overconfident Nexus formation, stretched thin by their pursuit of seemingly weak prey, began to crumble under the unexpected assault, but victory came at a terrible price. The Battle of Earth consumed nearly half the Coalition fleet. Brave pilots sacrificed themselves to ensure killing blows against Nexus command ships. Entire squadrons vanished in brilliant flashes as they completed their missions. When the last Nexus vessel finally went dark, a strange silence fell over the command center. The threat that had terrified humanity for months was gone, destroyed by a 10-year-old boy's impossible strategy. Around the ship, Coalition personnel began cheering. Earth was safe. Humanity would survive. But Jin watched the celebration with quiet, thoughtful eyes. He understood now that victory in war always carried the weight of loss. Admiral Lee knelt beside the small boy who had saved their species. Her weathered face was marked by tears she didn't try to hide. "Thank you," she said simply, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Jin nodded, clutching his brother's pilot wings tightly in his small fist. "Can I go home now?" he asked quietly. "I want to see my family." As the new soul turned toward Earth, Jin looked out at the stars and knew he would never see them the same way again. Games could save worlds, and heroes sometimes came in the fire. Smallest packages, but every victory carried the memory of those who paid its price. The boy who had played with starships had learned that the most important battles were fought not for glory or excitement, but for the people you loved. The end